I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving out to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I, both females, would spend many days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns, and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon back in March of 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Always up for exploring, we took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on NM 55. It's a remote, teeny tiny 2-lane highway. We love those type of roads. Up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and lonely desert. You can see for miles, and there's virtually nothing except dirt and rocks between towns. And the towns themselves can be miles apart. So we're on NM 55 going north. After a few minutes, we see this white pickup truck ahead of us, going the same direction, when suddenly he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking most of both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to feel a bit uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were now about half a mile away from him, when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, with his truck still pointed in the direction we were headed. We tried to relax a little. Surely this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was just checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things off the bat. 1. There was only a single person in the truck, a middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off of us. And 2, it looked like he was speaking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and began following us. But he never got too close. He would get to within a few car lengths, then drop back a little, then speed back up again to within a few car lengths. We began getting nervous. We realized just how alone we really were out there. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our phones, and neither one of us had signal. Typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up, while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. But there was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town, Mountain Air. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a viable option anymore. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us, and although we were a distance off, it seemed like he was going very, very slowly, maybe 20 miles per hour if that. This pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us was much newer. Amy had us up to nearly 80 miles per hour, which wasn't exactly typical on these 55 mile per hour highways, and we blew by the old pickup. As we passed it, we saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he too was talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup passed him, he pulled a U-turn and pulled in behind it. As we watched all this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking into his walkie-talkie in the rear view. No doubt, these two knew each other, and we were being deliberately followed. For the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road. We truly thought old beat-up pickup guy had set up a trap and our vehicle was headed towards it now. We were in an SUV, so we talked about driving into the fields, but this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered, so we decided to stay on the highway. By now, white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking into the walkie-talkie, and he stayed right on our bumper. Old beat-up pickup guy was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. White pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got to within inches of our bumper. Amy floored it, and we were now bordering on 90 miles per hour. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing going wrong would have been catastrophic. But there was no way in hell we were going to slow down or stop if we could help it. That's when the white pickup pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think was that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us. If he got in front of us and his buddy was behind, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of the road. It seemed now that the only option presented to us was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? But as we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said, Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed towards a road on the left. Right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled off that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up on it, we saw the plate said, U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other and then looked behind us, only to realize that both pickup trucks had done U-turns and were now speeding off in the other direction. We followed the blue pickup to Mountain Air and then made our way to Albuquerque as planned. I don't know what was on those guys' minds, but it wasn't anything good. There's something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police, and they said they would keep an eye on things. For a little bit more reference, this area is very near Belen, New Mexico, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant Butte, New Mexico, which is where David Parker Ray had his secret torture laboratory. We didn't put all that together until later. Even though David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us, we do believe that there are others out there like him. And whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. There is the possibility that maybe we came into meth lab territory, but since this happened on an actual highway, rather than a backcountry road, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. Whatever's going on out there, I think it would be advisable for most to just avoid it. Hey guys, if you're into the content that we create, we've got a Patreon where you can support the show and get early access to new episodes before everyone else. Just head on over to patreon.com/malevolentmischief or check the link in the description and join our community today. This story happened when I was much younger, back in my college days. It's something that stuck with me though, not just because of how horrifying it was, but because it was so close to someone I cared about. If you dig deep enough, you might actually find this in the local news. It happened in Providence, Rhode Island. At the time, I was dating a girl who went to school in Providence. It was summer, so most people were back home, scattered around and waiting for the next semester. My girlfriend's best friend, though, had stayed in Providence because she'd landed an internship. She was living in a 4-bedroom, multi-family home. While she was set to have 3 roommates for the upcoming year, they hadn't moved in yet. Something about the lease starting a couple of months before school kicked off. So, for the summer, she had the whole place to herself. One weekend, my girlfriend suggested we head down to keep her friend company. She was lonely and bored, and it seemed like a good opportunity to hang out. Providence was only about an hour away from us, so it was an easy trip. That Friday night, we drove down and spent the evening just chilling, drinking, talking, and admittedly, dabbling in a little coke. It wasn't anything wild, just the kind of carefree night you'd expect from college kids. Around 2 a.m., we decided to walk to a nearby gas station to grab some cigarettes. Nothing out of the ordinary. But on our way back, we passed this guy who gave off an unmistakably creepy vibe. He was on the opposite side of the road when we passed, but he stared at us as we walked by. It was a bit unsettling, sure, but we were on the street at 2 a.m. Her house wasn't in the best neighborhood, though far from the worst either. We brushed it off and went home, eventually passing out for the night. The next day, my girlfriend and I headed back to our town. The weekend ended, life resumed. But later that week, my girlfriend asked if I wanted to head back down to Providence to hang out again. Unfortunately, I couldn't. I had work all weekend. She went anyway, this time without me, and her friend's boyfriend also came over to stay. From what my girlfriend later told me, it was pretty much a repeat of the previous weekend. They spent the night drinking and even went out to party for a bit. Sometime around 2 a.m., they made it back to the friend's place. when they entered the mudroom, which, for those unfamiliar, is a small enclosed entryway just before the main door. The mudroom door had been left unlocked, something they probably didn't think twice about, but someone else had. As they stepped inside, a man was standing in the corner of the mudroom. He was waiting for them. Ragged-looking, jittery, and clearly unwell. He stared at them, and then with a voice that was sharp and commanding, he told them, "Get in the fucking house." At first, it seemed like everyone was too shocked to process what was happening. That's when they noticed the gun in his hand. He repeated himself, but louder this time. "Get in the fucking house." My girlfriend's friend had already unlocked the door to the house, and it was partially open. Everyone stood paralyzed, and that's when the friend's boyfriend, trying to defuse the situation, stepped forward with his hands slightly raised. He said, "It's all good, man. Just calm down." But what happened next was instant. The man raised the gun and shot him. Just like that. The boyfriend crumpled to the ground, screaming in pain. My girlfriend and her friend didn't wait to see what the attacker would do next. They smashed into the house, slamming the door behind them, heading for the furthest bedroom from the front door and hiding underneath the bed. Terrified and with tears streaming silently down their faces, they huddled there, waiting. They didn't know the man had run off after the shot. They were convinced that he'd followed them inside. While they were hiding, they could hear the boyfriend outside screaming for help. What was likely the most heartbreaking part was that in between his pleas for help, they heard him clear as day say that he was dying. The neighbors, hearing the gunshot and the cries, called the police. Officers arrived quickly, but by the time they got there, the assailant was gone. My girlfriend and her friend stayed under the bed, too afraid to come out until the police were in the house. In the hours after they finally emerged, they found out the horrifying truth. The man had been watching my girlfriend's friend's house for weeks. He had been the same guy we saw staring at us the weekend before. He'd been casing the joint, learning routines, and waiting for the right moment. The police launched an immediate search, and later that day, they found him at a local homeless encampment. He was clearly on drugs, and he even had the murder weapon still with him. They took him into custody right around the same time that the boyfriend succumbed to his injuries. That fact hit my girlfriend hard. She told me about the guilt that she and her friend felt, how they couldn't stop replaying the night in their minds, wondering if there was something they could have done differently. Whether they could or couldn't have, I firmly believe that they did what they needed to survive. Update. A user messaged me with some info, and they even added a comment with it. I'm going to share it in this post. Again, this story happened about 15 years ago, and I can't find anything on Google search. But with this information and the time frame, maybe some internet sleuths out there can dig something up. Yes, I remember when that happened. I believe it's right off of Broadway, on Cortlandt Street, right by the gas station. My friends had just moved into an apartment around the corner, and if I'm not mistaken, my current coworker lives in this very house with her boyfriend. They got a little bit of a deal on it, but didn't realize why until after they moved in. Apparently, there's still a blood stain on the wood floor in the mudroom. Thinking back to this summer makes my stomach turn. I wasn't there that second weekend, but knowing how close I was to the situation, and that I had seen the guy just a week before, keeps it firmly etched in my memory. Some moments in life are so senseless and brutal that they never really leave you. It makes my hair stand on end thinking about this guy. He saw me shopping for school supplies and things for my new apartment one evening during my first week of grad school and decided that I was his mark. I had just moved to my new college town, didn't even have a cell phone yet after leaving the ones my folks paid for behind. I was grown and I could take care of myself. I realized later I might have been a nitwit for that. As I left the parking lot with my purchases, I noticed this truck pull up behind me at the exit. It was late and there weren't too many people out. I pulled out, and so did he. It was a few miles down a long retail street with lots of stoplights before my turn. As I drove, I realized the guy in the truck was trying to get my attention. Thinking he might have just been trying to get my number, and I was in a relationship, I ignored him. Over the next few miles, he kept trying to get me to look at him. Some red lights, he would end up ahead of me, some behind, or even beside me. But at every light, he positioned himself so he could stare right at me, either directly or through one of his mirrors. His gaze felt unwavering, and I felt it trained right on me, and this is actually what made my initial anxiety rise. He was driving oddly, speeding up close to my bumper, hitting his brakes when he was in front of me, swerving close to my car a couple of times. When finally at a red light, where he was beside me, I glanced over and absolutely started to panic when I was met with an unbelievably empty, emotionless stare. It was then that I realized he was fondling himself. He was likely getting off on the fact that he knew I was terrified. His following me and his trying to force me to pull over wasn't making this any better. At one point, I scooted through an intersection on a hard yellow a couple of cars ahead of him, thinking I could shake him. Nope. He went around the cars at the light, ran the red, and got back in front of me. A freeway entrance ramp came up, and I tried to fake him out by putting on my signal and getting into the merge lane for it. He took the bait and started up the ramp. As he got ahead of me, I quickly got out of the merge lane and continued straight. Again, I'd hoped that I'd lose him, but he drove his truck down the embankment just to keep following. At another light, where he was beside me, I pulled through the light and then turned at the last possible second. He made a U-turn and ran another red just to keep following me. My panic really ramped up at that point. With no cell phone, no sense of direction, and in a new city, I really didn't know what to do. So I turned on classic rock and forced myself to sing along. Kept my car at the speed limit so I wouldn't crash out of sheer terrified stupidity. I decided to drive to the supermarket across town because I remembered it had a police station in it. He followed me all the way there. He burned out of the lot as soon as he saw all the cop cruisers parked out front. I filed a report and asked for a police escort home. I insisted on this because something told me this creep was waiting for me to leave the police station. And he was. As soon as I pulled out, I saw him. I pulled over and told the officer following me, and he went after him, but the truck had taken off and the cop couldn't catch up. The police got the surveillance video from the first store. It turned out this jerk had been dogging me the entire time I was shopping. I saw him on surveillance footage following me through the store. I saw him follow me out, close enough that he could have grabbed my elbow if he wanted to. I saw footage of him circling the lot in his truck waiting for me to pull out when I took too long to unload my cart. I was able to remember 6 of the 7 digits of his plate, as well as the make and model of his truck. In the end, the cops did nothing. They said it was a he said, she said, since the surveillance video didn't catch him doing anything particularly unlawful, and it was likely a losing case to try and charge him with anything. I ended up trading vehicles with a friend for a couple of months to try to feel safer and went about my life. I had no idea what this disgusting piece of did just a handful of months later, until almost 15 years had passed. I was watching a Discovery ID show about the kidnapping and murder of Sandy Jeffers. I almost fell out of my seat when I saw the mugshot of her killer, Aaron Lee Skeen. It was him. I was so disgusted that law enforcement did nothing in my case that I tracked down the investigator in the murder case, and after verifying some things about his vehicle that were changed in the TV reenactment to weed out people making crap up, she took my contact info and official statement. She could neither confirm nor deny that my run-in was with Skeen, but qualified her statement by saying, "At least you won't have to worry about him anymore, because he got life without parole." I only wish something could have been done when he terrorized me. Perhaps that would have been that, and things might have ended up differently for Sandy.